Now it's time to talk about how we can actually control our loops in a sense that if certain condition has been met, we can already use break, but there's another one called continue, and we are going to discuss both of these language constructs in this video. The first one is a break. So let's quickly have a look at the break documentation. So in a search, we are going to type break. And that takes us to the break documentation on the php.net website. And what it says that break ends execution of the current for each, while, do while, or switch structure. We've used break with switch before as well, and we obviously had a chance to try it with some of the loops we've been discussing in this chapter. Break accepts an optional numeric argument, which tells it how many nested enclosing structures are to be broken out of. The default value is 1, so if you don't provide any argument with break, then the default value will be 1. Only the immediate enclosing structure is broken out of. So basically, if we are in a switch statement after the case, if we match the case, then obviously we use the break to get out of the switch statement. But if the switch statement was enclosed within the for each or any other loop, then obviously loop was still continuing. Okay, then there's an example. We're going to try an example as well in just a moment. Then we have a change log for break. As of version 5.4, break 0 is no longer valid. In previous version, it was interpreted the same as break 1. So basically, you could use either break 0, break 1, or simply break, which would give you the same thing. As of PHP 5.4, 0 is no longer valid. Then from the same version 5.4, remove the ability to pass in variables. Example, number equals 2, variable called num equals 2, and then break with the variable name. Now you have to just use the numerical argument. You cannot pass variable as an argument, basically. Okay, let's quickly go to our editor and have a look at a few examples. So the first one will be, we are creating a simple array variable with the array, which will have, again, apple. Then we are going to have banana and peach. And what I'm going to do now is create the for each loop, and we are looping through this array as fruit. So each of these items is going to be represented by a variable fruit. So what I'm going to do now is check if fruit equals banana. We can actually do a triple equal symbol because we can check for equality this time, because we know these are strings and we're comparing against the string. And if that returns true, then we want to break out of this loop. Basically, we want to terminate this loop and move to whatever script we have after this for each loop. Okay, and after that, we are simply echoing fruit, which is going to give us the name of the fruit, and echo new lines, so they are all on new lines. Now what's going to happen? Because banana is the second item in the array, we should only see apple, because this will match and we will break before actually outputting anything to the browser. So the first time around, we check for apple, for banana basically, and we're going to get apple, so that will return false, in which case we go outside of it, because obviously nothing within the statement is going to be executed due to the fact that it's going, the if condition will return false. So we're going to echo the name of this apple, then new line. Second time round, the fruit will equal banana, and it is a string, so we obviously checking for identity here, in which case that will break and the whole for each loop will end. We never will even get a chance to check whether this last item is in the array is banana or not. So if we save it and preview everything in browser, if we refresh the page, and fair enough, we get apple. Okay, so break allows us to do something like this. But now what about the nested items, something like switch? And we did go through the switch before. So let's quickly try this. And what I'm going to do is, rather than using for each statement, I'm just going to use the for loop. So for, I'm removing obviously everything we've done up to now. Then I equals 0. So we're starting at with the variable I with the value 0. We know obviously for loop only the first expression will only be executed once. Then second expression is our condition. So we're checking if I is less than 10. Then semicolon again, and the last third condition will increment the I by 3. So with each iteration, we are adding 3 to the I variable. So the first time it's going to be 0, second time it's going to be 3, and the third time it's going to be 6, and so on. And inside of this statement, what I'm going to do is simply echo start, and I'm going to start at index, and we're going to concatenate it with our variable I, and then echo, and new line. Then I'm going to echo BR tag as well, because I'm going to put something in between as well in just a moment. Then echo stop, and we are going to concatenate it with, again, our I variable, and echo with BR. And let's do the space here between this column as well. Okay, and now between this start and BR and the following BR and so on, I'm going to put a switch statement in. So switch, and I pass I as an argument. And what I'm going to check if I, the case, using obviously case within the switch, is 6, then what I want to do is break, and I'm going to actually keep it like this for the time being. And then default echo I, so we echoing basically what this argument is, and then break. Now, if I was to run it now, this statement will return, and if we save it and preview it in the browser, there we go, starts at 0, then we have 0 because it goes from the default switch statement, then stop at 0, then we start in the next iteration, which is 3 because we added 3 to this I variable, so it starts at 3, it returns 3 again at the default statement. If we go back to the editor, this default one echoes basically the index through which we are currently looping, the value associated with this I variable. And then we have start of the next iteration, at which obviously in which situation we simply broke, but we broke out of the switch statement. We didn't break out of the loop. As you can see, we have start 6. We didn't return anything from within the switch, but we still get stop 6, and then we get next iteration with 9, and it's 9 returned from the default case plus stop 9. Now, if I do something like add argument to this break language construct, and I set it to 2 because default one is 1, obviously when we use it without any argument is 1, so it's the same as if we use this 1 here. But if we do 2, that means that we are going to depths out. So this is the first depth obviously for the switch, so the 1 or default without any argument would just break switch, but by specifying 2 means outside of the switch break the parent of the switch, which is our for loop. So now what's going to happen is we only should get to 6, basically seeing only 0 and 3, because next one is 6, at which point it should break our for loop. So if we save it, preview it in a browser, refresh the page, and that's exactly what we get. So the first time is 0, second time we get 3, and the third time only start is displayed, because when it hits the switch statement, and let me quickly go back to the editor again, when it hits the switch statement, we obviously get 6 with the start here, we get to the case 6, which is matching obviously the 6, that breaks the second, basically the parent of the switch statement here, because it's number 2 obviously, so it's not the switch, it's the parent of it. If we had another loop around this for statement, then we could use 3 as well, which would break the obviously the parent of this for statement, and so on. But let's quickly have a look at the example actually with embedded loops as well. So what I'm going to do now is remove everything that we have here. And what I'm going to do is create a variable called a, and I associate number 1 with it. Now I'm going to start with while statement, while loop, and I'm checking a is less than 3. So as long as a is less than 3, we are going to execute what's inside of this loop. We are echoing the paragraph, the beginning, the opening paragraph, and obviously we should probably echo the closing paragraph straight away. And in between, what I'm going to do is create the for loop. And inside of the for loop, I'm going to use b variable equals a. So I'm declaring the new variable b, and I'm associating the value that comes through, obviously, as an a variable. Then we are going for the b variable, and we're checking if it's less than 3. And the last thing is we are incrementing the b variable. So very simple for statement. Obviously, first of all, we're associating whatever is associated with a variable with the variable b. Then we are checking this variable b, whether it's less than 3. And obviously the last expression simply increments it by 1. So every time this for loop runs, the b is going to be incremented by 1. And now inside of this for statement, we are going to use switch. And inside of the switch, I'm going to pass the b variable as an argument. And we start with the case 2. If it's case 2, then simply break the switch, because we don't pass any argument. So it's switch basically that we're going to break out of if it's 2. And then default, we are going to echo b, and let's just display basically what that b is associated with. And then echo new line br. And lastly, break. Again, we are just breaking switch. We are not breaking out of any of these loops. And then at the end, before the closing paragraph, let's just echo a, and we display whatever this a has associated. So we have one loop. Inside of this loop, we have another one, and then we have a switch statement. Now, if we save it, preview everything in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go. First time we've got B1, A1, B1, A1, and so on. And as you can see, my browser is going mad because it's indefinite loop at the moment, and it's going to crash in just a moment. So I'm just going to stop it so that it doesn't execute anymore. Let's go back to the editor and check why is it doing this. And it is doing this because, as you can see, the main while statement, while loop, doesn't have a incremented at all. So every time the new iteration comes through, the a still is 1. What that means, the only thing we are going to get is basically comparing this statement, this 3, against 1 all the time, basically making obviously this whole loop basically unstoppable. Basically it's one loop which never ends, and obviously would at some point crash my computer and browser and so on. So make sure that you always know what you're doing obviously with the loops. Make sure that if you're doing something like this, there is some kind of incrementation and some system in place to stop it at a given time. If you do it indefinite, then obviously you will crash many people's browsers and possibly computers altogether. So what's going to happen now, obviously what I need to do at the end of the statement before the closing bracket for this while loop is to increment this this a variable. So post incremented. So the next time around it's not going to be 1, it's going to be 2, and the last third time that it's going to run, it's going to be 3, at which point it's obviously going to fail and go and end basically this while loop. So let's quickly save it and preview it in a browser now and see what this is going to give us. And there we go. That's much better, obviously. We've got B1, A1, and A2. And let's see, why do we get all this? So first of all, we are looping, we're creating this new paragraph, and then we go through this for loop basically. The first time around, the b is going to equal 1 because the number that we have associated with a is 1. And we're checking if it's less than 3. So the first time around, it's with 1, b equals 1, so obviously it doesn't match the case 2. It matches, however, the default one, which always runs, obviously, for anything that hasn't been matched within the switch statement. So it obviously echoed b equals 1 in the browser, and then we have after that a colon 1, taking obviously the first value associated with a variable. So if we go back to the browser, we've got B1 and A1. Fair enough, that works fine. Now, next time around, this a has been incremented by 1 by using this a++ at the end of this loop. So now, rather than having this as 1, we have 2. We're checking 2 is less than 3. Yes, it is. So let's execute what's inside of this while statement. And now for b, we have 2. So we're checking if b is less than 3, it is, and we are obviously at the end of this first statement, this first loop here inside of the for, we are incrementing this b by 1. So obviously this time we're only gonna have one iteration, because 3, when we increment 2 by 1, because b is going to be 3 the second time around, and it's obviously not less than 3, so it's going to exit this for loop. In which case, obviously this case 2 now matches, which makes it breaks the switch statement, and it only displays this a basically colon, and then obviously value 2 associated with variable a. And obviously again we are post incrementing this a variable, at which point this reaches the number 3, and obviously number 3 is not less than 3, so this while loop exits. And if we go back to the browser, that's exactly what we get. So we only get this A2 at the end of this while statement. Now to exit the while loop when b variable equals 2, for this case 2 here, all we need to do is to say break, then space, and number 3. And what that means, break on its own or break 1 would basically exit switch. Break 2 would exit the wrapping for loop. Break 3 exits the wrapping while loop. Basically, it depends. It basically goes up the nesting chain. So if you've got while, then we have nested for loop, then we have nested switch. So it's 1, 2, and 3. And obviously, if you had more wrapping loops, then you could obviously use higher number to exit those as well. So if we now try it in a browser, refresh the page, as you can see, we only get B1, which is echoed to the browser with the first iteration of the while and the first iteration of the for loop, and then obviously with the switch, because the case 2 hasn't been met the first time around, because B will equal A, which originally is just 1, only the default case here is echoed to the browser with B, obviously an associated value of the variable b. Next on the agenda is continue. In a search, let's type continue. And continue is used within looping structures to skip the rest of the current loop iteration and continue execution at the condition evaluation and then the beginning of the next iteration. What that means, it's pretty much like break. The only difference is where break actually terminates the given iteration, if it's directly in a loop, continue will only terminate the current iteration, which means it will skip to the next iteration straight away. Basically, when the PHP script finds the continue in a loop, and it's basically telling PHP, okay, we stop at this given line, we don't continue with the rest of the loop code, the code within the loop, we just go to the next iteration, basically. And then we've got this note here. In PHP, the switch statement, which we've been using as well, the conditional switch statement, is considered a looping structure for the purposes of continue. Continue behaves like break, which is what I've just explained, when no arguments are passed. If a switch is inside a loop, continue 2 will continue with the next iteration of the outer loop. Continue accepts an optional numeric argument which tells it how many levels of enclosing loops it should skip to the end of, which is basically what I've just explained and what we've experienced already with the break statement as well. The default value is 1, thus skipping to the end of the current loop. Same as with the break. Let's now move to the editor and try a few examples. We are going to start with the array. Again, this array will contain 3 fruit types. So apple again, then we have banana and peach. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is simply loop through this array using for each statement. So array as an argument and as fruit. So each item will be represented by this variable fruit. What I'm going to do first is check if fruit. We can use triple equal symbol here because we are dealing with the strings and I'm comparing against the strings, so it can be identity here. So banana. So if fruit equals banana, then what I want to do is use the continue language construct to make sure that the rest of the script is basically omitted and we jump straight to the next iteration. And after this condition, I'm just simply going to echo fruit, and then echo new line. So we've got all of them on separate lines. So basically, when we hit the banana, so when this fruit is going to contain banana, as it has on the second item has it, so obviously it's indexed 1. When it hits this condition will return true, then continue will force the loop to skip this part of the code and jump directly to the next iteration, which will start with the peach basically. So let's save it, preview it in the browser and see if that's what we're going to get. If we refresh the page and we get apple and peach, banana is completely ignored because of this condition here. So continue basically allow us to skip the rest of the current script in the current iteration and jump to the next one. Basically, that's what it does. Whereas break would terminate the entire loop. Okay, let's go for another example. This time we are going to use the for loop, and we are going to pass the first expression will be I equals 0. The second one will make sure that I is less than 10. And then we have I again, and we are incrementing this by 3 with each iteration. We are going to start with echo start, and we are concatenating this with start, obviously, with our I variable, then echo again, and new line br, and then let's quickly echo another br after that. Then we'll have echo stop, or we can put end here, for instance, colon or no colon. It's entirely up to you. It's basically just to indicate where we are. Then I as well, and then echo with new br line. Okay, and in between we are going to put our switch statement again. So switch, and switch will take I as an argument, and we are trying to match it with our cases. So for case 6, when I will be 6, what I want to do is continue, but with the number 2. What that means, rather than continue with the switch, I want it to continue with the for loop. So basically when we hit this, when I will be 6, the case 6 will match it, and continue will basically skip to the next iteration of the loop without displaying all this. And the additional default case, remove this indent, default. For default, what I want to do is simply echo this I value associated with I, and then obviously break the case. Okay, if we save it and preview it in a browser, refresh the page, and there we go. We start 0, 0 from the default one, and end 0. Then we have start 3, 3 from the default case, and then end 3. Then we have start 6, and as you can see, we don't have anything echoed from within the switch statement, because when we hit 6, we've got this continue condition here. We've got this continue statement, which tells PHP, okay, at this point, we are going 2 levels up, so switch, and then for, and continue with the next iteration. So don't go any further down. Just from this point, just move back to the second layer. So it's not switch, it's for the for loop, and start with the next iteration, basically. I'm pretty sure you obviously get the idea already anyway. So that's how it works, obviously. And if we go back, then we have 9, which obviously has displayed start, then it has default case, and obviously end at the end of the for statement. The last language construct that we're going to discuss with connection to the loops is return. And we've discussed return obviously in the past on several occasions. We've used it several times as well. Let's now try and use it with the loop. And I'm going to copy and paste something here, something that I've prepared earlier, because it's pretty much the same structure that we've been using over and over again. So rather than retyping this again, I just paste it. Obviously, you are pretty much familiar with all this. Now, the only difference is now rather than having break or continue, I used return statement. And at the end, after the whole for each loop, I've got this line echo done. And now this line will never really be returned back to the user. And why? The reason is because when we match, when this condition will return true, and it will return true because we have banana string here in this array, then this return will terminate the current script. Basically, return, terminate, current script, unless it's obviously within the function, in which case it terminates, it ends the execution of the function and moves the cursor, basically PHP, to the next line after the function. I'll show you this example with the function as well. So let's first preview what we've just done here in the browser. So save it and refresh, and we only get up. As you can see, this line at the end has never been shown in the browser. Now, if we wanted this line to still be displayed after that, what we would need to do is enclose this for each loop in the function, within the function. So function, and let's call this function test. And what I'm going to do is put the curly bracket here and wrap this entire for each loop within this function. So now this function is inside of the, now this for each loop is inside of the function. Obviously, we haven't got access to this array now. So let's quickly pass array, make sure that it's a type hinted because we're expecting the array. We are looping here through the array, so it must be an array type. And what I'm going to call it, say, items or fruits. And let's rename this array here to fruits. So fruits as fruit. And now we can call this function, so test. and we pass in this array that we've prepared earlier here above before this test function. So if we now save it and preview it in the browser, now we refresh the page, and you can see that we've got Apple, and when this return has been reached within the function ended, and obviously PHP moved on within the same file and echoed this done string in a browser. So now obviously we can see this echo and whatever else would be after that as well after call to this function, because return now only terminates the current scope basically. So obviously its local scope is this the enclosure of this test function. Now I want to show you another example. Let's modify what we've got here a little bit, and I'm going to actually get this function away from here. So we just have a for each in a global scope, and we are looping straight away from this. Actually, let's rename this array to fruits. And what we are going to do is create another array. This time it's going to be called output, and it's going to be an empty array to collect some values. And after the for each loop, what we are going to do, echo using implode language construct as we've used before. And we want each of the items in this array when we are joining it, because it's basically implode, that's what it does. It joins obviously array items, as you may remember from previous videos, and then we pass in the output array as an argument. So that's what we want. We want all these items, each one on its own line. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is, rather than having return when we hit banana, what I want to do is go for the output and add new item to this array. And now what I'm going to do is use include function, language constructs, and I'm going to go to the include folder, and then for the return.php file. We haven't got this file yet, we will create it in just a moment. And apart from this, if this is banana, then we do this else statement, and I'm going to remove all this, and in the else statement we'll simply go for output, and we just put the fruit name into fruit basically name into this array. So if we now save it and let's open the file browser, let's create this directory include, and inside of this directory we create this return file, the PHP file return, so return.php file. And what I'm going to do here is simply use the return now, because I'm using return in the file which I'm calling. We're using this include function here, language construct again. What's going to happen here is that return, as I've mentioned earlier, return only terminates ends the execution of the current script, and the current script to this return is this return.php file, so will not terminate the execution of this index. Because we only import in this file, it will terminate the execution of this return.php file. And we only want to return basically some strings. So let's say my favorite fruit is, and then in the curly brackets, because I'm in between the double quotes, I'm going to use the value. Because I'm including this file, this value does not exist directly in this return.php, but I'm including it inside of this loop. And sorry, it's not value, it's fruit actually, so let's rename it to fruit, because I'm using this include option here to include this file within my for each loop. Now this fruit is available in this scope, and it will be available to this return file when it's going to be called. So if we now save it all and preview everything in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go. The first item was not banana, so it's just been the name of the fruit added to the output array. The second one was banana, so the match obviously has been done, and we have this sentence now returned from within this return.php file, and the fruit variable has been returned replaced with the name of the fruit itself. And then we have a peach as the last one, because obviously it's not a banana. So that's how you can also work obviously with the return, which returns some value from within the file that it's called and included within the current script.